Okay, so we're just going to look at some data now related to our shift and diversion policy that occurred during the last shift. So right now you can see a blank timeline that starts it starts November 1st, 2021, and it goes all the way through towards the end of March, March 22nd, March 21st, 22nd, 2022. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the things on this timeline here now. We've got a day that I'm calling when the surge began, and obviously the surge didn't begin and end on any single day. So we'll talk about that. But for the time being, we've got the surge quote unquote began on 12/16/21. Please remember that on January 13th, 2022, we, as an emergency measure, had to institute a new diversion policy that took place on that particular day. And then I am saying that the surge, quote unquote, ended on February 18th, 2022. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about those began and ended dates. So what that leaves us with here now is a period of time that we can call the pre-surge with the old policy. And I'm referring to the diversion policy, old diversion policy. Then we've got a period of time within the surge that is the old diversion policy. Then we've got a time in the surge that is the new diversion policy, and then we've got a period of time that is post-surge with the new diversion policy. And it was this last period of time that we've been waiting for to be completed in order to bring this data to our county constituents here. So we got 4 periods of time here. We've got a pre-surge period of time where there was less system stress of 45 days, and then a post-surge period of time of less system stress that was 33 days. And then within the surge, we have 2 periods of time. And again, remember, these were periods of time of intense system stress, one of which was 28 days, and then the other is 36 days. So what we can't do is compare in order to control for the surge the best that we can, and there's no perfect way to control for the effect of the surge or the virus. So the best thing we can do is simply not to compare anything within the surge to anything outside of the surge. So what we're going to do is we're going to compare these 2 sets of data, that pre-surge and that post-surge, and the difference there being the different diversion policy. And then we're going to compare these 2 sets of data. Again, that took place just before and just after the new diversion policy was put in place. Okay, I'm going to take away a bunch of this stuff, and then I'm added in some blue lines here. Again, we've got those 4 periods of time, and these blue lines represent the total number of emergency departments were on diversion for about the week or 2 leading up to the new diversion policy. And it was the total number that were on diversion at a single time. This wasn't, you can see we hit 16 on 4 different days, and that wasn't 16 throughout the day. That was 16 we hit at a single time. Remember, things were really, really bad when it came to diversion, and it was clear that something had to be done. We couldn't allow 16 EDs on diversion on any one day. And in fact, every time we hit those on those days, we shut down diversion completely until the next morning. Well, it gave a slight, a slight break to everything, but then the next day they really just stacked up on top of each other. So you can see there on the 13th it came to an end because we really had to put this new emergency policy in place with regard to diversion. So just to remember, things were really bad in those week or 2 before this diversion policy. So let's talk about the surge began and ended. And again, the surge didn't begin or end on any single day, and trying to pick out that date is a little silly, but for the purposes of data analysis, I kind of had to pick a day. So what I didn't do is I didn't use any of our EMS metrics to define those days. That would kind of be cherry picking the data, right? So I used as much just kind of COVID specific data as I could. So I used COVID case counts, COVID case positivity rate. I especially used those to define the beginning of the surge. And actually that was a pretty, I'm pretty confident in that day as being the beginning. The case counts and the positivity really shot up on that day. It was the end of the surge was a little bit harder to define. And remember, case counts became pretty worthless during the surge because they were just a massive underrepresentation as the use of home tests became probably much more than the PCR test, right? So case counts weren't real useful later in the surge. So to define the end of the surge, I used the hospital COVID census. So how many people were in the hospital with COVID? We have very good counts of that. And then I used ED borders to kind of help define the end of the surge. So again, didn't use our EMS metrics to define the beginning end dates, used COVID, and then looked at these EMS metrics with respect to those time points. So we looked at transfer of care time, both the average and 90th percentile, total hospital time, both the average and 90th percentile. We looked at the use of internal disaster by our hospitals. We looked at the use of specialty care diversion, because remember, we were still letting you guys do STEMI, stroke, and trauma diversion. So how was that affected? The city of San Diego shares with us their ambulance level 0 data. So I've analyzed that, and we'll look at that too. And then we looked at both unit assignment time and transport time, again, both average and 90th percentile. So I'll stop there and see if there's any questions before we kind of look at the results here.
Total hospital time is what, on bypass or diversion, or what was that?
Total hospital time is the time from when the ambulance arrived until they go back into service. So it's a lot like transfer of care time, but transfer of care time ends when the patient is transferred from the ambulance to the ED. The hospital time adds a little bit more time while the unit is going back in service. And it's not reliant on the transfer of care time, which is not a CAD timestamp. It uses only CAD timestamps to define the time window. Okay, so the first comparison we're going to look at are these two data sets. The pre-surge, the old policy, that 45-day period that was all of November and a little bit of December, and then this post-surge period that is kind of in the February, March time period. So what we have here is a table with all of these metrics over on the left side. I've actually added pre-hospital volume and ED volume as trying to give you guys a little bit of an indicator of system stress during the two surges, because the system stress, I've called it pre-surge and post-surge, but at no point can we say that the system stress was exactly even during these times. So I've added those in just for you to reference. And then what I've done is we've got the pre-surge measure for each of the metrics, the post-surge measure for each of the metrics. What was the post-surge increase in the metrics? And then you can see most of them held pretty firm in terms of didn't go up or down. Anything in this 5%, 2%, 4% area we'll call that stable. You will see that a lot of the metrics actually did go down, got better before the surge, after the surge compared to before the surge. But we do see that the use of specialty care diversion in average daily minutes went up by a little over 26% when we compare these two time periods. And then we do see that the biggest, the one that improved the most was the City of San Diego level 0 data. So that's the average daily minutes for any day in which there was not an ALS ambulance available to respond to a 911 call. So I'll leave this up for just a minute for you guys to digest. And I don't think we're going to stand here in front of you guys today and say that the diversion policy made things better, as all of these negative percents would indicate. But what we are going to suggest is that it didn't drastically make things worse, as was a huge concern throughout the community, right? That you turn diversion off and it's gonna really make things really bad in a lot of different areas. And our data here says that specialty care diversion did go up by a non-significant amount, but everything else didn't get a whole lot worse, at the very least. Okay, so this was, again, these are the two periods of time that were outside of the surge. So now we're going to flip and we're going to compare these two sets of data. the 28 days before within the surge before the policy and the 36 days within the surge after the policy. Table is going to look exactly the same in terms of its layout. All of the same metrics over in the left side. You can see that the use of internal disaster increased by 2,600% after the diversion policy with compared to before the diversion policy. However, similar to the previous slide, all of the other metrics at the very least, we can say didn't get a whole lot worse when we put that emergency policy in for diversion. So again, I'll leave this up for a minute for you guys to digest. And at this point, that's my last slide, so I can open it up to any questions or comments that might be out there.